going to do a slow-mo here so you can see how I'm grabbing the pieces. If you notice, my pinky is wrapped on the table saw fence. I learned this many years ago. This way I can grab pieces and always have a reference point of where my hand is. I really don't grab pieces that are much smaller than 2.5 inches. That way, just to make sure I can keep all 10 of my fingers. Now just starting to glue the pieces up, just using standard yellow carpenter's glue. If you notice not being overly careful on excess or whatever, just make sure you apply enough. The key being is that by setting it aside for even as little as 1 minute, with the current stuff used today, that's pretty easy. You can start gluing up many pieces together rather quickly. Just gluing in the final pieces, you'll notice I'm not using any special clamps. I'm not wrapping them with rubber bands or anything along those lines. As long as you have your angle set correctly on the table saw, when you do the final pieces, there isn't a whole lot of gaps or anything to work with, which really makes a difference. Make sure your angles are accurate. This is a homemade sander attached to the lathe. It's using 120 grits, 10 inches in diameter. I use some spray adhesive to attach. Really what this is doing is I'm flattening all the different segmented pieces together. What's kind of interesting is when you're using something with the nibs, like the small pieces in the middle there, once they get sanded flat, you can actually hear it on this, knowing that you are flat. When you try it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Now I'm just going to start gluing up all the pieces. You can see I made a bottom portion there that's also made out of 3/4 inch plywood. That's going to be the bottom of the bowl. Now I'm just going to attach all the segmented pieces. So this part here that I'm doing with the sandpaper, by rubbing the sandpaper together, some of the grit will fall off and fall into the glue, and that really helps it stay in place when you go to glue up all the other pieces. The sandpaper just helps keeping it from sliding around. And for the alignment, I'm just using my fingers to make sure it's even at all the points. Didn't feel the need to measure, get out a tape measure or mark it or any of those things. With your fingers, you can be pretty accurate. I ended up cutting some thin walnut strips that I'm going to glue on top of the very last piece. I was kind of worried about with the plywood, how it would look at the top if it didn't have a solid or something that would make it look more finished. You'll see in the end that this really was a good decision. I added a piece at the bottom of the bowl so that I could attach a faceplate, so I could attach this to the lathe. Just needed to make sure it was in the center. That's all that's really important. Otherwise, your bowl will be off center. This is just a time-lapse video of working the bowl all the way around using a square carbide tip. When I get to a point where it's pretty close, I shift it over to a round, just a little easier to handle, trying to get some more of the high spots removed. Working on the inside, due to the wonderful editing, I was able to already do some, and I wanted to show you how I'm working the inside here. Because of the location of the camera, normally I'd be looking right down into the center of this, which would be blocking the camera. So I had to work out a method in order to figure out how I could record this and still do this safely. I'm going to demonstrate because, again, the location of the camera where I'm actually looking while making this cut. So you're going to see here where there's kind of a line that's appearing on the inside. That's actually what I'm looking at because I'm standing to the left of this image. This way I had a good idea where I was in the bowl in relation with my cutting tool. Since this is plywood, you're going to have portions where sometimes the glue or something in the middle may pull out. Again, plywood isn't your normal wood you're working with for turning, so I needed to fill in some of the gaps. So all I'm using here is a thick CA glue with some activator, and I'm just hitting the ones that are obvious. I'm not hitting every single spot, but again, the idea is just to make sure I don't have any major gaps. Now just using a standard round cutting tip, I'm going to remove those high spots from the CA glue. And the pieces that are coming off, you can see them hitting my hand. You definitely can feel it. With this being plywood, it's not necessarily as smooth as walnut or a hardwood. So are there portions of the plywood that just felt a little fuzzy or just needed a little more hand sanding? I'm also taking this opportunity to check the piece overall just to make sure that there isn't anything that I've missed. The piece that I attached to the faceplate that is glued to the bottom of the bowl was done with carpenter's glue. That is not just going to pop off. So using a vibrating cutting tool, I've been using this for the last few months. It really makes it relatively easy to remove a piece. This is probably one of the biggest bowls and or with the foots attached where I glued like this that I've done this way. It took a little longer than I thought, but in the end, I really like using the vibrating tool to remove these. So once done and removing the bowl, you're going to see the bottom of it. It looks kind of chewed up. But I used a belt sander on the bottom of it, smoothed it right out. It looks perfectly fine. Because this was plywood and it looked very plain, I did add a quick stain. These are what I use from Minwax. It happens to be a golden oak. But using the stain preconditioner really makes a difference in making sure it looks even. All I'm using here is a standard Zinsser or Bullseye shellac. They can get at any box store from a can, and then cutting it or making a one-to-one mixture. So if it's a half a cup of the shellac, I use a half a cup of denatured alcohol. Keep it in the little container. It will separate. All you got to do is a quick little shake before you apply it. And you can see I'm applying it. I'm not being overly cautious about how much I'm applying. It's much more important about covering that surface. One of the things that did surprise me is that this plywood really did seem to soak up this coating rather quickly. Even in general, I usually apply it every 30 minutes, but it almost felt dry after 5 minutes.